Welcome to HEA's HypnoConnect, the podcast by the Hypnosis Education Association. Real conversations, expert insights, and meaningful connection. Brought to you by HypnoBiz in a Box, the ultimate all-in-one hypnosis business platform. Let's get to it.
So do you have some slides to share with us? Or are you going to take it away with a presentation? How are we going to do
Well,
this?
it's like when I heard the intro, my two favorite topics I have three favorite topics I always talk about. Obviously, just general NLP.
Yeah.
Addictions, because that's my clinical specialty.
Yeah.
Is hypnosis and psychology.
Yes.
Right? And then behavior profiling and deception detection.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I'll talk about that for a little while.
Awesome.
Right.
And
go ahead.
Before we do, I do want to give a shout out because I almost at least once a month, I have somebody who comes to me that's out of scope because they have addiction issues. And I just want to let those who are watching know that if you feel that way, you can refer them to Dr. Horton because I do.
Well,
all the time.
Or I could talk about addiction. Those are my two favorite subjects.
Yeah.
So, when we get started, let my brain marinate here, right? Squirrel. Not that. But as you get ready to do any kind of thing, I always start with asking yourself, how can I enjoy what I'm going to do today? How can I enjoy this class? And then how can I use whatever material I get in here, both personally and professionally, right? Yeah. And you don't have to write the answer. You just think about how can I do that, right? And how can I apply this information in every aspect? And lastly, of course, how can I enjoy this class? Because one of the things about how your brain works that a lot of people overlook is when you ask an open-ended question and you don't answer it, your brain begins to drop and go into autopilot, right? And it starts searching the data banks, goes to your prefrontal cortex and then deeper, and it looks for things, right? And it's also sort of a shortcut to how when you get into wise mind, Buddhism kind of stuff, it's like, trusting. And so, I love doing that because then at the end, especially if you ask that before you start any kind of learning, you'll be surprised and delighted about the information that you begin to get. And so, I'm going to default to the addiction world because you mentioned it. It's a problem, and it's getting worse. And it's not just fentanyl. That's a major problem. But, alcohol and all of the drugs of abuse, right? But I always stress to people to realize that most of the addictions, of all the addictions, the one that causes the most damage and the most deaths is hands down alcohol, right? More people die from alcohol withdrawal and all the other things, right? Fentanyl gets the headlines. Alcohol is the main story, but has to do with a lot of things in our society. And so what I want to do is give you a different psychological model because my quick story in addiction, that's how I got into this world, is overcoming one myself back in the early 1980s and stumbled back into the hypnosis and the NLP world and started to apply it. And I had a certain viewpoint, like a lot of people. You learn what you learn and this works, right? But now with all the research, which is what I'll talk about, what we really know about addiction is much different than what was taught, right? Much, much different than what was taught, right? Because now we know how your brain is actually processing this, right? So here's a quick, kind of fun little psychological model, right? Which is, I call it the levels, right? And this kind of gives a format, right? Most people, when you're born, you're tabula rasa, you're sort of a blank slate, right? Now, the more we know about DNA, that's not necessarily true, but you're pretty much a blank slate. Now, let's jump into the world of addictions and or bad habits. What's the difference? That's what people always want to know. Is it just a bad habit, you're drinking too much? Or is it the next level where it's an addiction? And so, I've been thinking about this and working with it and then studying all this neurology, went back to graduate classes in neurology and neurobiology. And so, it's fascinating. But from the psychological standpoint, I call this the levels, right? We start with levels. So you're born, you're kind of tabula rasa, you're a blank slate, right? And you're probably abstinent. If you throw out the one off of, if your mother was actively drinking or drugging heavily, but if you throw that out, toddlers and that, most of them will recoil from, especially alcohol, the taste of it. So you're abstinent. Now, even in those early ages, when you're a little kid, you're still, getting information about all this stuff, right? And so, a parent may tell a little kid, when you grow up, don't drink, it's bad for you. And then yet the only time this little child, let's say 7 years old, sees mom and dad having fun and all this is when they're drinking, right? And so they begin to develop the belief about, oh, drinking's fun. To have fun, you got to drink. And then, of course, the media, and when I say media, I mean all media, but, movies, books, television, a lot of them glorify the drinking experience. Maybe not the addiction, but they glorify the drinking experience, right? And so you get these ideas. And I always use a TV show that was popular a couple of years ago, Yellowstone, where all the cowboys, the rough and tumble, and cowgirls, there was a couple, right? They lived in the bunkhouse and they drank a lot of, vodka and tequila and beer. Now, if you ever been on a ranch, been around a ranch, I have horses. I don't claim to be that kind of cowboy. But when you get around those, it's like, when you're really out there doing that kind of work, not that you may not relax on your days off and do that, but you don't party the way it seems like on some of these shows, because it's pretty tough to roll out of the bunk at 5 a.m., saddle up and go take care of the cows in the farm. And so they're doing that. But the rich guy, the Kevin Costner, the top end, they're drinking, the bourbon and the Cavassier and all the fancy stuff out of crystal glasses. So if you think about all of us hypnotists, people that studied or are interested in it, think about the message going into this young mind, like, oh, drinking's fun. That's what real men do. Cowboys, cowgirls, woohoo, And when you make it, you don't stop drinking. You change what you're drinking, and it's cool and it's relaxing. And then there were some of the messages a couple times. A few of the lead characters would say they need a drink to relax. So these beliefs get in your mind, right? So then going back to that, so you're having no experience, and then you go through where you experiment with drugs and alcohol. Even though people in the call, if you have kids, you'll say, not my kids. Well, statistically, like 90-something% are going to experiment with drugs or alcohol in high school. Used to be primarily drinking and a little bit of marijuana. Things are changing, but those are still the top two. Now, of all the people that experiment, there'll be a small group that go, I don't like this. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I don't like what's going on. And they just don't drink anymore. They don't like it, One of my cousins is like that. Now, it was from the side of the family where alcoholism runs rampant, but he went to he was on the football team after high school football game. They went out, had a few beers. He got a little tipsy, didn't like the way he felt. Whatever it is, 50 years later, he still doesn't drink, whether it's weddings, funerals, places I've seen him, just doesn't drink. So some people do that. Most people drop from experiment down into social use. You could drink, not drink. It's no big deal. One of the markers of a true social drinker would be you'll order a glass of wine or a beer and you drink half of it and go, nah, I'm done. I don't want it anymore, right? And most people that are social drinkers may not be able to tell you the last time they had a drink. It's not that big deal to them, right? Because they don't think about the drinking. But then most people stay there. But then a lot of people will drop from social use to abuse, right? And we'd call it substance abuse disorder. But they're drinking, and I'll focus on drinking. They're drinking in spite of negative consequences, right? And it could be they're self-medicating. A lot of this starts with self-medicating. they've lost a loved one, they lost a job, bad things happen, COVID shut down their business, so they start drinking too much, kind of to self-soothe, to self-medicate, right? And even though there's negative, people may be yelling at you and you might be in trouble, but you keep doing it, right? Now that's, the substance abuse could be negative, like I said, and all you got to do is think of like country music, right? You ever listen to country music? Every other song is my wife left me, my dog left me, this happened, it's sad, so you're drinking her memory away. And then, but most people, it could be that, or it could be even, I've had a lot of clients where they went to college, they joined a fraternity where they drank a lot for 3 or 4 years. We're getting a little bit of trouble, but graduated. Most of those first two groups, to tell the difference between just the substance abuse and what I'll talk about next, is they quit. They work through the depression, the anxiety, they graduate college, they go home, they get a job, they get married, they go back to normal. And against what some of the classic addiction things would say, they actually go back and may or may not drink. It's no big deal, right? But a small subsection go from the abuse to dependence. The people that drop into the dependence model, they cannot not drink. Once they start, it starts a different cycle, right? It's a true addiction. And here's why. I can give you the neuroscience. It's pretty easy to understand, right? Your deep brain, your amygdala, your deep brain, main job is to keep you alive, right? It has 3 main jobs, right? Which is, to keep you alive, to eat, to kill or be killed, to survive, to find food, water, things like that, shelter, kill, to ward off enemies, or to take care of your needs, and then also to procreate. That's the 3 things. That's all your brain wants to do, that part of your brain, right? It's constantly scanning that, right? And what happens, that part of your brain is rarely it doesn't activate too often. You don't go into, when we talk about trauma, you don't go into fight or flight. You're pretty fun. But, if you're hungry, you'll look for food, right? Whatever kind of person you find attractive, you could be head over heels in love. I'm not saying anything like that. But whatever kind of person you find attractive, that's who you'll notice, right? And, if your fight or flight kicks in, that's the survival mechanism, right? And then you have your prefrontal cortex, where you think things. This is your thinking brain, right? And again, and what happens between the people that just abuse a substance and one that has more of a dependence, it's a brain-based issue. They call it a disease. And I know some people want to argue that because they say it can't be a disease, because the technical definition of a disease is there's an organ in the body with a defect or damage that has certain symptoms. If you have diabetes, it's your pancreas, right? And a couple other things, right? It doesn't process sugar, right? So you may need help with the insulin. That's a disease, right? And so they always wondered, when it comes to addiction, it can't be a disease because it's a psychological thing. You should, it's a mental thing. You're just making a choice. But then, when you look at this model, so you have substance abuse, you have substance dependence, people that are over here, here's the difference. If we put you in an MRI, so now, and this, 10 years, big time, maybe 15, it's really been popular. They start doing all these MRIs on your brain. Now that they can do the real focused brain imagery, almost down to the neuron. So if they put someone who's drinking too much and they put them in an MRI and they say, they're happy about the election or they're sad. So think about having a drink and calming down, whatever your favorite drink is. Say it's beer or a glass of wine. So they think about it, and we all know your brain will think about it. But for most people, what happens is their prefrontal cortex lights up. They think about the drink. They think about the glass of beer or the wine. But the prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that can make plans, that can see time, that knows, well, I got a busy day tomorrow. It's kind of late. If I have a couple of beers, I probably won't feel good tomorrow. I just won't, right? Or after work where people go, we're stopping for a drink, and you think about it, it'd be good, but I got it, my kids' soccer game's at 5. I don't want to show up with, booze on my breath, so no, I'll pass. So they're able to make that choice. But the group that can't seem to stop, something different happens. When you put them in the MRI and, and you have them think about the drink, their prefrontal cortex goes dark. It shuts down. So they can't plan really anything. And their midbrain lights up, right? And so what happens when your midbrain lights up, you go into fight or flight, and that's what a craving is. And what happens for certain groups, that group, you have like survive, fight or flight, food, procreate, if you put it in that order, right? Like, so fight or flight would be 1, food would be 2, procreate would be 3. Well, once you get into, if you have this where your prefrontal cortex shuts down, your midbrain lights up, suddenly it has to do with a dopamine response and how your brain processes dopamine. Suddenly there's a new entry into your survival mode, and that is the drugs or the drinking. So that becomes number 1. That's where you hear an addict or an alcoholic talk about, I need a drink. I don't want it. If I don't get it, I'll die. When you see movies where people are like going into withdrawals, they're in that state, and very few people will actually die from the withdrawals. I don't care if it's heroin or fentanyl. More people die from alcohol withdrawals, but it feels like it. You need it to survive, right? Because now the current research says, it could be alcohol, it could be, opioids, it could be smoking dope, doesn't matter. Your brain is really addicted to the dopamine response it gets you. It's also why you see people, quit heroin and end up an alcoholic, right? Or vice versa. And so it's a brain-based issue. And so the whole thing is to begin to tamper down or calm down that midbrain, your amygdala, your deeper brain, your fight or flight responses, and reactivate, to bring back online the prefrontal cortex. So you can like see things through time, right? And that is the most fascinating thing. And, and that's where, the idea that for some people, the alcohol or the drugs is actually like an allergy, right? So if you have an allergy to strawberries, if you ate a strawberry or were exposed to it, you're going to get a histamine response. So if you have this about, like, let's say alcohol, and you have an allergy to it, your response is you go into craving. And that's where you hear, some of the recovery phrases people say, 1 is too many and 1,000's not enough. I don't have an off switch, right? And so that's some of the stuff, And so why don't people, even if they learn this information, people go, oh, that makes sense. Well, information does not change people, right? It can give you information and insight, but it doesn't change. You have to really go in and talk those things in the subconscious mind to change the beliefs and the attitudes. The number one fear of people I work with, and lately I've been focusing on like entrepreneurs and business professionals that want to get their drinking under control. They're successful, but this one part of their life, for whatever reason, they can't get control over, right? And so I've been focusing on that group, right? Because I've always worked at least part-time, and I do stuff at alcohol and drug rehabs. And usually that's a different clientele, a lot of the ones I work at. But so I like working with these people because it's about taking back that control, right? And you could do that through the hypnosis techniques and the NLP techniques, but you also have to build in a back end, if you will. You have to build in, right? If a person's been, especially if a person's been using alcohol medicinally, or it's just part of their system right now, and you could take away them actually drinking, well, they're going to have to relearn a lot of things, how to have fun again, right? because I'll shut up with the addiction neurobiology. But if you drink long enough, what also happens, and the other drugs do it, is in your brain, your dopamine response gets set higher. You know, it's like if you eat a lot of sweets, you can't taste sweet as much as somebody that doesn't eat sweet, right? And it's the satiation point, right? It's why, like, you know, how many hundreds of millions of dollars they spent to make potato chips addictive, right? And what it is, they raise that where you feel satisfied with it super high, right? And so if you think they do it with food, you know, things are sweeter. And if you eat something and you get sat, it's that set point. So what happens is, for you to have fun, you need a massive amount of dopamine. And so, you know, and sometimes people, this is how most of my clients come to me. They go, I was at this thing this weekend, like a family event, and everybody was having fun, and, you know, with the kids and whatever, just a family event on a weekend, right? And they're like, I just couldn't wait to go have a few drinks because this was boring. What's wrong with me? Why can't I enjoy normal things? A lot of times people with a drinking problem, that's what friends and family may say, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just relax? Let's go to the movies. And you're like, well, no, not unless it's a movie that we can drink. And you're like, ah. So that's the difference. So it's not just, I was sometimes getting arguments with hypnotists about, you got to build in some kind of ability to go have fun, develop new social networks, right? Because never, and I'll make a strong statement, usually I'm an NLPer that won't make absolutes. I've never seen someone just put down a drink and be able to hang around bars successfully for any long period of time, right? It's the old analogy, you know, you don't go to a whorehouse to listen to a piano player. You're there eventually you may have a drink, right? And so, you know, but it's how your brain operates. Some people, I'm one, you know, I don't think my sister or I know my sister or my brother don't have it. I got it. My brain responds differently. You know, it's a genetic thing. And I'll close with that, right? Because as much as I would love to be 6'2", 220 pounds, no, didn't work out. My brother's 6 foot, about 200 pounds, right? It's just the different genetics that we have, right? And so, you know, and so that's what we do with hypnosis and NLP, is help people begin to refocus what's going on, right? And again, if it's just a person that drinks too much, they can go back to their normal lives. And yeah, we got time. I'll tell you one last story. What really changed my opinion was I read some research, and I call it the happy rat study. And the happy rat study is, you know, back and it's what screwed up the treatment of alcohol and drugs. Because up to the 1960s, it was just seen as a sad issue with people, right? And then in the 60s, they did a study where they got these rats hooked on, I think it was heroin, cocaine, different rats, but they hooked them on a couple of drugs and alcohol. And then what they found, you know, they get them hooked. Their rats were in a little cage. And then they'd usually take a male rat, get him hooked, and then throw in a female rat in heat, which should activate that part of their brain where, woo, we're going to procreate. Wouldn't happen. The rat would keep drinking or using the drug basically till it died. It would ignore mating, it would ignore food, it would ignore water. So that's when we started the zero tolerance, that drugs and the kind of like when we went to prohibition, that was the problem, the drugs and that. And then at the flip side, they criminalized it. We don't punish people for getting cancer, right? But if they say it's more of a moral issue, you know, it's easy to point fingers and judge them, right? Even though, like, they don't, like you said, we don't judge people with cancer. And even though it could be lung cancer, you know, you smoke 3 packs a day for 30 years, I'm a victim. And you know, so that's kind of where we were, and it became very punitive, right? We were punishing the people for drinking and drugging. In fact, an intervention, if you were going to design a system to make sure someone couldn't quit drinking or drugging, the current intervention system will do that. They get your friends and family, and they all point fingers at you, yell at you, and say, if you don't quit drinking, we're not going to have anything to do with you. Right? Well, the person's struggling enough. When they need connection and love, you're giving them punishment, like putting them in jail. And so it doesn't work. So a psychologist looked at it and said, the problem with this is they were in this little cage that was miserable. So he duplicated the study, got the rats hooked, and then rather than throw in a female or food or other things, he, excuse me, my nose itches. He took the rat out of that cage and put them in a happy rat cage. There were lots of rats. There were kid rats. There was things to do because rats are smart. It had things to do. It was very stimulating. All the rats stopped using, right? And so this coincides with the happy rat study with Vietnam, where, we had all these troops in combat in Southeast Asia, where they were using massive amounts of heroin. You were in the Golden Triangle, so it was everywhere. Lots of hashish and really good marijuana, right? And then on top of it, the military sent in lots of alcohol, right? Try to keep everybody happy, right? And so people were abusing that. So they didn't know what they were going to do with all these troops coming back with addiction problems, right? And oh, by the way, a lot of them are trained killers, right? We go through military training, it's like part of the thing, weapons training, explosives, things like that. But surprisingly, going back to my level story, and I will close this loop, as we say in NLP, is most of the people coming back after they got out of the unhappy rat cage of Vietnam and they came back to a happy cage, and they went back out with their girlfriends, hooked back up, got a job, got their life back. They went back to normal. They integrated back into society. Right? A small subset continued to drink and drug. And the other little caveat with that is, especially the people that were going back to a life of low hope. The deep inner city where there were no jobs, going back to a part of the country where, the farms were closing, the factories, the coal mines. So you didn't really have a future, right? And you can always look at like where, especially fentanyl addiction is the worst. It's in parts of the country where people don't have hope. The factories have closed, the coal mines and auto plants. And so, there's no hope, right? So addiction recovery is about hope for getting better, hope for recovery. So that's like what I call the levels. And like I said lately, and I'm starting a thing called the Sobriety Society. Sober is the new sexy. Because a lot of people are, they start with like dry January or dry October or whatever they're doing. And people get a taste of it and they go, this is fun. They just have to retrain parts of their brain. That's what I love doing. So if anybody has any questions or anything, that's my current thing. And I'm getting in, I could do the whole thing on the neurobiology, but it gets a little deep. But it's kind of cool.
That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
You can get deep.
Yeah. So I'm sure it would take, an entire certification to learn how to help people with addictions the way that you do, right? But I hear what I'm hearing you say is that it's when you have somebody who's actually requiring it, that craving is part of their survival mechanism now, right? That you can help them with hypnosis as long as you're layering in and let's give them other things, which is not that different from what are you going to do now that you're not taking a break from your spouse when you go have a cigarette?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to take that break anyway? I'm going to give you permission to take that break. It's not that different. Of course, it's a lot more serious. So you're helping them to find the ways to have fun. And they might need to find a new happy rat cage. They might not have a happy rat cage at all.
And one of the things that seems to work across, whether you want a 12-step, I like 12-step program, whether you want one or not, is the idea of new playmates and playpens.
Yeah.
Right? You got to get, and then once you became a hypnotist, a lot of your old friends thought you were nuts.
Yeah.
What? Especially, when I first got back, was really getting into this, I was making a lot of money selling computer maintenance programs for IBM mainframe computers. That's how old I am, right? And then they go, you're quitting a 6-figure job. This is back in the 80s to do what? You know, I'm going to become a hypnotist. Yeah. And I ended up getting a lot of different friends, new playmates.
Sure.
You know, I've seen you at a few places, and
Yeah.
and that, you know, and the only other thing I do always say is I'm beginning to see it in the hypnosis world where, you know, I think I've heard you guys say it, but other people, it's about like, you know, niche yourself rich, find a niche, stick to it, drill down, right? You don't, but for many years, all hypnotists were like, and there's nothing wrong with being a general practitioner, right? But in Newport Richie, if you went to the best heart doctor with a bad shoulder, he's going to say, I haven't done that since medical school. Go talk to the guy with the, you know. And so I see that we're starting to take that approach, you know, especially for certain things, you know. Addiction would be one, right? And there could be others. I always think of like people with cancer, you know, especially stage 4 cancer. Unless you've worked with it, you might want to refer that out. And one of the things I say about addiction is when I used to do a lot of certifications, and I say, first of all, half of you by the end of this class will learn a lot of information and decide you never want to work with addiction. Right? Because you know, you have to be able to focus on the people that make it, not the ones that don't.
Right.
I was at one center and they were talking, one of the people was there, sobered up, was doing great, ended up doing like volunteer work, became a tech, he overdosed. And everybody's freaking out. I go, that's what addicts do. It's not nobody's fault. I mean, you know, but if you take all that, one of the people were taking it very personally. And I'm like, you know, maybe you ought to rethink your profession.
Right.
So I have a question. So do you think hypnosis is working for the ones who, you know, have the habit, but don't have the genetic part of it?
I think it's easier for them. Right?
Yeah.
Because not that you can't help the people with the genetic part, but you know, you have to learn the other tricks with it. And some of it just, I know some people hate the 12-step program. Steal from what the 12-step program's done successfully for 90 years, right? That's why when someone's coming up, especially from alcohol, carry candy. Right? Carry
around.
Carry candy around, the heart like peppermint to get a sugar. Used to go in and they always had orange juice and honey at meetings, right? So you could put a little honey in the orange juice to get the blood sugar. And I say to some people, of course, hypnotists, some of the snotty ones go, well, now you're just helping them with, oh, Jesus Christ. I've never been arrested for eating candy in the car, but I've served a couple weekends in the brig because I was drunk driving on base.
Right. Yeah. So that's one. So it's some things to help, because the blood sugar thing is something that many say. They'll actually say, now I eat lots of cookies, or now I have a sugar addiction. Like, well, which is worse, really? Obviously the other, because it will take your life faster, and much faster, in a much more violent way.
And you see a lot of the people that are successful after a period, eating all that much sugar, not everybody, we see it, just go to Walmart, for God's sakes, you know, you know, it's like, you know, I don't need to go to Area 51. I go to Walmart. But that will subside.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, I use the medical analogy when someone says that. It's like, you ever have a loved one go through chemo? Right? If you've had a loved one go through chemo, they warn them, these are the side effects for a while.
Right.
But if you do it, when it works, it'll get to the cause and help you make the change.
Right.
You know, help your body change. And that's what we're doing.
So do you work with the ones that you think have the genetic?
I'm really curious about the genetic part too. Is there an indicator, you know, a genetic indicator for?
Well, they're they're looking at like a test, which scares the shit out of me, right?
Right.
Because then good luck ever getting a good job if they know they run your profile. Like, oh, look,
Right.
by the way, you're, and all it would show you is you're predisposed,
Right.
Exposed, right.
you know? But they're like, if you have American Indians
Yeah, they have
have a higher incidence because American Indians, almost all the tribes, they had no liquor. They didn't brew beer. They didn't make wine. They didn't make mead, right?
nothing.
So they're for thousands, however long the split was, 35, 40,000 years, they had no exposure to this. And then when they showed up, when the Europeans showed up, you know, as one guy said, it wasn't the rifle that won the West, it was whiskey,
Wow.
Mm,
right? All they knew is they had to get the, you know, the men who are more prone to it, hooked on whiskey, and we could take their land. Right? So if you have American Indian, Irish sort of have that twist, right? So like me, I'm Irish and Indian, so
Me too.
me too.
strap in.
Here we are. Hi. Irish.
And so yeah, so they're looking at that, and it has to do with like I said, how the brain operates and how the liver processes alcohol out of your system.
Yeah.
Most people, if they drink, I forget what the ratio is, alcohol, it will burn out of the system like 1 ounce an hour.
Mhm.
Some people, right, and it's not regardless of size. It doesn't mean like because you're 6'4", 6'5". Other people, they have that 1 ounce of alcohol, but rather than take an hour to burn out, it might take 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So then what happens is you get drunk, you pass out or you go to sleep, you wake up 5 hours later, where most people would be at least sober. You're still under the influence. So it's not necessarily like you got up and drank. It's kind of like you never stopped.
I think that sounds like my friend Byron. He died from alcoholism, and
Oh.
that sounds like his cycle was kind of like that.
Yeah, because then if he woke up after, like if he slept for a long time and woke up and didn't have the alcohol in his system, he probably wouldn't drink first thing in the
Right.
morning. But when you
Right.
wake up and you're still half blasted, it's like, yeah, have a little bit more.
Mm.
And then you're, you know, the 1 turns into 2, and then, you know.
Wow. Wow.
Well,
So do you have a certification or a classes where can people get more information about helping people with addictions, alcohol addictions, other addictions?
Okay.
from
Well,
you?
yeah, reach out to the easiest is Horton Psychology, HortonPsychology.com, HortonPsychology.com,
Okay.
and just message me. I can send a really cool video that goes into the neurobiology of it with the slides, so it begins to make more sense.
Awesome.
And you know, because it gives you that, and sometimes just letting people know that when people come in, if they have that, is that it's not their fault, right? And look at how society, you know, bombs us with, you know,
Mhm.
drinking. And I always use the Yellowstone example, but there's plenty of examples of, you know,
Yeah.
of it.
And the things that are and it's available at literally the convenience store in Florida. You can
Oh yeah.
pick it
But
up with your coffee.
Oh,
So it's just there. It's everywhere. And if
it
you're
freaked me out in Florida when I, you know,
yeah.
when I first got here, or we were going scuba diving, right? I'd never been to Florida. I was stationed in Alabama and Georgia, but I don't think I was ever in, I was drunk a lot, so I might have been in Florida, but I don't think I was in Florida. And I got down here and I was getting gas in my truck. And when I went in to pay, I'm like, Jesus Christ, they had iced beer, single cans,
Right.
and a paper cup. And then they don't drink and drive.
Right.
Yeah, you know, it's Florida. It's 95 degrees with 80% humidity. I'm gonna save this ice cold Miller till I get home
With my paper cup.
with my red, solo cup.
Wow. Yes, that sounds about right.
Yeah, yeah. And heck, in the one town I lived in for a while, they had the drive-through store where
Oh,
you
Yes,
just
yeah.
roll
we've
your
got
window
one of
down.
those in Newport Richie. Yes, it's kind of a scary thing.
The beer barn.
The beer barn, I think it's
Mm.
called.
Those licenses are valuable, I found out. 'Cause
I'm
you can't
sure.
get them anymore.
No. Goodness.
Wow.
Wow. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know that I get a lot, we get a lot of people who request help, and I don't feel a lot of time. I think that they need treatment, or I have people who I had a young woman who lied, who said she was just drinking wine on the weekends when her husband went away, and she showed up at my office bombed, like she
Oh,
probably
yeah.
had a fifth in her car, and I had to send her home with information. I sent her home with information on how to, on detox facilities, because there's no way I could help her without her getting help in a facility, or she was going to likely die. Right? I mean, this is dangerous.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. I used to, when I do the trainings, I always tell people, well, my rule of thumb would be if you called me, great. When's the last time you drank? Yesterday, maybe today. I don't care. All right, we'll make an appointment. What's today? Wednesday. We'll make an appointment for Saturday. Right. And I need you to not drink for 2 days.
Yeah.
Because that's a marker. If you can't not drink for 2 days, you need to get some different level care. But even when you come to that, one reason people reach out is not everybody can go away to treatment. If you're a single parent, how do you go away to treatment? Your kids are going into foster care.
Totally.
If you ever dealt with that system, good luck getting them back, right?
Mhm.
Or you're an entrepreneur and you're pretty much a one-man show or two-man show, right? So if you take the time off, bad things can happen. Or you, one guy called me, goes, I'd really like to go, but my company's cutting back. And if I took a month off and they found out they didn't need me, they lived in Georgia, which is a right to work state. I'll get back to work and my office will be packed up.
Right.
That's just the brutal realities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then even then, if you go away to treatment, and I'm dealing with this with the treatment center I do some stuff at, is what do you do when you get out? It's easy not to drink in treatment. I could always not drink when they sent me off to military training because it wasn't around. You're out in the jungle or the desert doing fun shit, right? So what happens when they get out of treatment? They're going back to home with the
Same environment.
and the research says you do better if you actually get a lot of the treatment in the place you live, because that's the thing you have to change. Just like you work a lot with people with weight loss. It's like Dairy Queen's not closing. Haagen-Dazs is at every gas station and corner, and so.
Wow. All right. Well, I will take that and I will remember that. I'll tell him, probably give him even more days. I'll be like, well, I'll see you next week, 1 week. Let's see if you can make it.
Yeah.
Good.
And then if you really, and in my heart, if they call and say, I'm not coming in, I'm doing fine. I don't get upset. I say, well, good for you.
Great.
Good for
Awesome.
you.
Yay.
Yay.
You did
I'm
it.
here if you need me. I'm here
The
if you need
phone call worked. That's all.
phone call.
Just had
Yes.
somebody to give you a bottle of hope over the phone here.
Yeah.
Bing, boom. There you go.
Yeah, that's why I should install a 900 number. So when you call me, I'm making money.
Right. Get paid. That's awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Willis. Is there
Cool.
anything else that you wanted to share with those who would
No, but
watch
like
this
you
recording?
said, I'm relaunching my
Okay.
doing just the old traditional NLP techniques, the
Excellent.
basic NLP,
Mhm.
that the techniques have been updated, but it's the basic NLP stuff. So I'm working on doing those again.
Right. And what conferences will we be bumping into you at?
I know I'm going to IACT
Yep.
in May, and well, I always go to the Guild.
Yeah.
I've been going to that since 1988, for God's sake. That's the only two on my agenda.
So Orlando and where is that? Marlboro? Marlboro?
Yeah, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Marlboro.
And this year is their 75th.
Wow, man.
So they're really pulling out all the stops.
All right.
And there's a changing of the guard there.
Oh, okay.
For many years I went to Hypnothoughts. It's a fun conference, very
Mhm.
different than the others.
Yeah.
I just don't like Vegas. It's part of the reason I quit.
I'm not a
We
fan
don't
of
love it
Vegas
either.
The energy, it's like,
Yeah.
the energy, at night it's not bad. It's upbeat. Everybody's excited. But if you get up in the morning and walk around, it's like, Jesus, give me a gun. I just want to
Right.
shoot myself. This is
Zombie land.
I don't get it. So we go in for the conference, we get out, but I'm amazed at the people, and please don't judge me, anybody who's watching. I'm amazed at families who bring their families to Vegas, like little
Oh.
people running around. Like, why would you bring them on vacation to this place?
Preach,
really
sister.
weird.
Well, when I first started going to Vegas was right after I sobered up in the 80s, and a bunch of us sober people would go. It was a blast. It was, I mean, we weren't drinking.
And I don't even gamble, so I can imagine they run around being crazy.
we would gamble a little bit, and then there was the, all the stuff that goes on. And then when they kind of, like you say, they brought in it bothers me, the last conference I was at out there, I'm walking down the street and there's a guy and his wife and a couple kids walking right on the strip. And the guy goes, "Here, sir, here, here's a coupon to whatever, the ranch, it's like it's a whorehouse, right?"
Yeah.
And the guy goes, "No, thank you." And his wife goes, "How dare you?" And the guy looked there and goes, she goes, "How dare you? Our kids are here." He goes, "You're the one that brought your kids to goddamn Vegas."
Just like that. Just like that, right?
Yeah, and it's like, and I'm standing aside going, that was a reframe from hell.
That's funny. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then they also put in now, a couple of them, they have the video arcades for kids. They're training the next generation.
Yeah, no joke. No joke.
Yeah. Cool. Anyway.
Awesome. Awesome.
now that
Thank
we
you so much for
complained.
being with us today.
Thank you for joining us on HEA's HypnoConnect, the podcast by the Hypnosis Education Association, a not-for-profit organization serving the hypnosis community since 1998. Proudly sponsored by HypnoBiz in a Box, the all-in-one platform for building a thriving hypnosis practice without burnout. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow, leave a review, and share it with a fellow hypnotist. Ready to grow with a supportive educational community? Join the HEA today and help us spread the word about the nature, uses, and benefits of hypnosis. Visit us at hypnosiseducationassociation.com. And if you're looking to get started, streamline, or scale your hypnosis business, head on over to hypnobizinabox.com, where you'll attract steady clients, generate reliable income, and be supported by a community of like-minded hypnosis professionals. Until next time, find a hypnobuddy, stay inspired, and stay connected to HEA's HypnoConnect.